Hi there, welcome along to Good Morning Transfers. We are just 4 days away from the start of the new Premier League season and clubs are still scrambling to sign players. Spurs are in the market and we've got big developments which involves a Manchester City player. Also on the way, Rasmus Hojlund is wanted by several clubs in Europe. Could he leave before the window closes? After having a window to forget, there's good news for Eddie Howe as Malik Thiaw heads to the UK ahead of a medical. And will Nicholas Jackson leave Chelsea this summer? He was left out of a pre-season game once again this weekend. Right, morning to you guys, morning to Kev Hatchard and to Dan Khan as well. We're going to start straight away, though, with some breaking news because Sunderland have made another signing. They've agreed a deal to sign Omar Alderete from Getafe. It's a deal worth £10.4 million plus £1 million in add-ons. The 28-year-old will now travel to undergo a medical. So that is the 11th signing, potentially, for Sunderland. What can we expect from Alderete?
Well, I think he's somebody that certainly could deal with the physical stresses and strains of the Premier League. You don't play for Jose Bordalas at Getafe if you're not tough, and he's absolutely that. He had a spell in Germany with Hertha Berlin for a team that was largely battling relegation, so maybe we didn't see the best of him then, but I think he's learnt a lot since then. And I think, again, it's smart business. It's somebody who can come in and deal with the top flight.
Sunderland, you can't accuse them of not giving it a go. 11 signings, that'll be.
No, absolutely, Matt. And I think this is a really interesting signing as well, more just from the age profile as well, because we've seen Sunderland look at younger players, even with some Premier League experience, like Simon Ndingra from Brighton. But I think in the last few signings, we're seeing a bit more experience with him, with also Granit Xhaka in the recent weeks as well. And I think that's, to me, where the Sunderland squad really needed additions, is that real experience to really, as you said, deal with the physicality and deal with the trials and tribulations the Premier League throws at you throughout a 38-game season. OK, well, that meant we started the show with that. We were going to start, though, with this story because it's a really intriguing one. And Tottenham have approached Manchester City about signing Savinho. Talks are underway between the two Champions League clubs. However, City don't want to sell him. He only signed for them last summer from their sister club, Thiaw. Dan, you can set this up for us. It's a potentially fascinating move, this, isn't it? It's almost come out of nowhere. Yeah, that's why we love the transfer window, because you do get links and potentials like this. And when you look at both perspectives, it is very interesting. When you look at from the Manchester City side of things, as you mentioned there, Matt, he only signed from Thiaw last year after being on loan at Girona, all under the City football group. And they signed him for £30 million. He's only been at City one season as a 20-year-old. You can look at his statistics, not amazing in terms of numbers. I mean, he did get 10 assists in the Premier League and 1 goal. But for me, Kevin, he's still one of very, big potential.
I think we were both a bit gobsmacked when this came through because he's a player that's really developing. You look at what he did for Girona, for example, in La Liga, helped them qualify for the Champions League for the first time in their history. So I think there's a player with huge ceiling, really high ceiling. But, Pep Guardiola, if he gets any inkling players don't want to stay, then he's happy to let them go.
And it's a great point because we've seen that in previous windows, the likes of João Cancelo, the likes of Kyle Walker, even Julian Alvarez, who joined Atletico Madrid. And I think the interesting thing for Manchester City is when you look at, this is a player, first of all, who did start 3 of their 4 games in the Club World Cup just, over a month ago. But they also do have quite a few options out wide. The likes of Omar Mamouche can play on the left. Oscar Bob is back now after a long-term injury. That's not even talking about the likes of Phil Foden, Bernardo Silva, Jeremy Doku, who can all play on that left side as well, both sides really. So in terms of Savinho, maybe his minutes would look more limited in a new season. I think when you look at Tottenham's perspective, though, they have just lost Heung-min Son as a big influential force in that team. Mohamed Kudus, a great addition in the summer, but they don't have a lot of attacking options. And I think Savinho can play as a 10 or out wide. Dejan Kulusevski is just coming back from injury as well. So it does make sense in terms of what Thomas Frank is trying to build at Spurs.
That's a good point, actually, isn't it, Kevin? Because now with Maddison out, you'd think the number 10 would be the key role that they want to fill. But do you think Savinho can play there for Tottenham?
He's intelligent enough to do it. I think he's got that one-on-one ability to open up space. He doesn't just have to be that wide threat. And I think this is possibly about status within a squad as well, because within the Manchester City squad, he is one of many excellent attacking players. He could be more of a lock for that first team, I think, at Tottenham. I think he's shown in La Liga, in the Premier League, that he is adaptable. And he's still so young. He still has so much potential. So I think this could work out really well for Tottenham if it's something that they can see through.
I mean, he's incredibly exciting. I mean, when he first started under Pep Guardiola, I mean, the way his ability to dribble but also take on defenders, I think that ability is so underrated in modern football because we don't see that a whole lot now with how structure is with certain coaches and managers. I also think when you look at Tottenham as well, the likes of Matthias Thiaw is going from a winger under Ange Postecoglou to more as a 9, the likes of Richarlison as well. So that left flank especially feels a little like Wilson Odobert, still relatively young as well.
Yeah. All right, let's move from the blue half of Manchester to the red half and talk about this guy, Rasmus Hojlund. His days at Manchester United could be numbered. How close is Rasmus Hojlund, Dan, to leaving Man United?
Well, look, I think after Benjamin Sesko signed over the weekend, have to say he was paraded at Old Trafford before the game with the likes of Mateus Cunha and then Brian Mbeumo. There's a lot more questions over Rasmus Hojlund's future. Of course, a player they spent £72 million on just a few years ago. And we understand AC Milan are now in talks with Manchester United over a potential move for Hojlund. What I think United will want out of that type of potential deal is I think they would be happy with a loan, but with an obligation to buy in terms of going into the future. One thing I do want to say about Hojlund, though, Matt, is yes, his future has been in question, but I've been around United in the last few days. I was at their training ground reopening on Friday where the whole first team squad, Ruben Amorim, were all there. Hojlund was there, smiles, acting very professional on Saturday, the last pre-season game at Old Trafford, seeing what seems to be his replacement getting paraded before the game at Old Trafford. During the penalty shootout against Fiorentina, he acted pretty positively amongst his teammates. And I think that type of behaviour has to be, seen as a real positive in a window where, for various reasons, you see players not training with their clubs or making huge statements because of their future. You have to admire the way Hojlund's gone about his business, whether he remains at United or not past the deadline.
Kevin, Man United want a permanent sale. Are AC Milan in a position where they could buy Hojlund, or is it going to be more of a loan situation? And how high is his stock still in Italy? Because that's obviously where he came from for Manchester United in the first place, scored a few goals out there.
I think it is still high. I think it's interesting as well, if you look at Joshua Zirkzee, for example, he's still quite highly rated in Italy. He was being linked with Juventus not that long ago. So players like Zirkzee and Hojlund have done it in Italy, not over a long spell of time, but they have proven that they can score goals, make goals. And what he did at Atalanta was very impressive, and that's what caused United to move for him and spend so much money. In terms of Milan, their situation's really interesting because they brought in Santi Jimenez, the Mexican striker from Feyenoord, and you thought, right, he's set to be there for the next few years. There's talk of him being moved on even now, which I think is bizarre, quite frankly. There's talk of them not only moving for Hojlund, but Dusan Vlahovic as well, who Juventus are desperate to get off their wage bill. And so if both of those were to come in, Milan suddenly wouldn't have room for Jimenez. So there does seem to be real interest, and I just wonder whether it'll end up being a loan with an obligation to buy something like that to give Milan a bit of room.
And just a quick word on Hojlund. I mean, you also, even though he came out in pre-season and was adamant he wants to stay at United, against Fiorentina on Saturday, he was an unused substitute. Mason Mount started as a 9 instead of Hojlund, and he didn't come off the bench whatsoever. So for Hojlund now, I think he's getting an indication he's not part of Ruben Amorim's plans going forward. And I will go on about this for the whole window. It is a World Cup year. He needs to play football for his own international future to be at next summer's World Cup.
Well, he actually came on board before Ineos, didn't he, Hojlund? So if he goes, is this a sign that Ruben Amorim is slowly getting together his kind of team, his kind of players?
Absolutely, and I think we can have a look at some of the players Manchester United have signed since Ineos have joined the club. And it's very interesting, the two positions that they haven't signed in, or their gaps in that team, are potentially the two that they might be looking at before the deadline. We know that if they can, they would like to reinforce that midfield. But I think when you look at Hojlund's position, the one player isn't there, Joshua Zirkzee, is also potential, of course, as a forward. But I think when you look at Hojlund, he does maybe just come as a bit of a victim of this pre-Ineos era where, you know, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Vivell have really led the recruitment at Manchester United. And of course, Vivell, Kevin, was a huge reason as to why Sesko joined United, because he had scouted him at RB Salzburg and RB Leipzig as well.
Yeah, knew about him for many years, really pushed for that. And I think Sesko is a sign of where they're trying to go to. But we said that to some extent about Hojlund as well. I think it's going to be about creating a culture in which these younger players can thrive. So they've gone for an interesting blend, some more experienced players like Mbeumo, like Cunha, but also somebody like Sesko, who I think does have enormous potential, but has already got a bit of a track record. I think it's a real shame with Hojlund. I still think there's a really good player in there. I just think he's kind of been chewed up a bit at Old Trafford, and I think that can happen to a number of players. We've seen it with so many.
Yeah, and just when you look at those signings again, I think the one thing they all have in common is physicality, versatility in the majority of them. And I think that's really interesting in terms of potentially any more interest in Collis Believe at Brighton as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We'll keep an eye on that. Let's move on to Newcastle, though, because after a summer of disappointment in the window, it finally looks like some positive news for Eddie Howe. Malik Thiaw will have his medical today ahead of a £35 million move from AC Milan, incidentally, to Newcastle. I want to start with you, Kevin, on this one. What are Newcastle getting in Mr. Thiaw? Wanted to say that. Will he improve their 11?
Yeah, I think he's certainly somebody that can... Yeah, I think he can certainly slot into that 11. Long term, I think he'll improve that 11. He's a really interesting one because he came into the Schalke team really young and he was touted as a real star in the making. But he came into a team in real flux, you know, battling relegation, a bit of a mess, really. And so he came through that, learnt a lot from that, has gone to Milan. That was quite an eye-catching move at the time. And he's really fought for his place. And I think he's great on the ball. I think that's going to be important. Great at fizzing passes out from the back line, those line-breaking passes that can get a move started. And with that comfort, you know, that is the modern centre-back. That is what coaches are looking for. And I think he's developed physically. He used to make quite a few errors. I think he's really worked hard to kind of get those down. So, yeah, I think this is a really positive move for Newcastle in the long term.
So do you see he and Sven Botman as the first choice centre-back pairing going forward?
I think certainly somebody who can... They're looking at Fabian Schär, who's been a brilliant player for them, and thinking about succession planning in the long term, but also they're going to have a lot of games. So I think they need that depth in that area, and Botman, of course, injury-wise, has really struggled. So I think he's somebody that could play either of those positions anyway. As I say, very comfortable on the ball. So, yeah, again, I think very positive, not just for the first 11, but for the squad.
Was it also important that Newcastle got a big signing like this over the line fairly quickly because of all the negativity surrounding the transfer activity and the Isak situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It just changes the narrative and also the momentum of their transfer window a little bit after missing out, as we know, missing out on some high-profile targets. Actually, with Thiaw, it feels, like you said, Matt, getting a deal done without being into any sort of tug-of-war for a signing, and now actually a centre-back who feels very exciting next to Sven Botman for the next 4, 5, 6 years will be what Newcastle hope with this signing.
All right, loads more to get through this morning. Stay with us because we're going to talk about Nicholas Jackson. Is his time at Chelsea over? We're going to discuss that next. Some more breaking news for you on Good Morning Transfers. PSG and Bournemouth have a total agreement in place for the sale of defender Ilia Zabarnyi. The deal is worth £54.5 million, guaranteed with add-ons. The Ukraine defender is now free to discuss personal terms after arriving in France for his medical yesterday. So it looks like another big defender on his way out from Bournemouth, and again to another big club in Europe. First of all, from a PSG point of view, Kev, why were they so keen on Zabarnyi? Because they've been chasing him for a while now.
Yeah, I think they are impressed with not only the physical aspect, but also the comfort on the ball. And I think what they've looked at with him is somebody that they can develop, but they also want somebody who's ready to be cover and competition for what they have now, which they don't really have, because they've got Marquinhos, they've got William Pacho. They were the bedrock defensively of what they did in Liga, in the Champions League. But what we saw in the Club World Cup is when they don't have somebody like Pacho, there's a big drop-off to somebody like Lucas Beraldo, who I don't think is quite at the level they require. Luca Hernandez has had some big injuries, hasn't quite been the same player in recent seasons. And so they want somebody that can step in if either Marquinhos or William Pacho are out. And you've got to think, long-term, how do we replace Marquinhos? So I think this fits in completely with what they've been doing, identifying younger players who have established quality, who Luis Enrique can really school and really bring along.
I mean, sometimes I think you have to take a step back and look at maybe if we were talking 3-4 years ago, and if we were saying out loud, a club of Bournemouth size in one window were to sell their two centre-backs to Real Madrid with the history and prestige of that club in Dean Huijsen, and then Ilia Zabarnyi to PSG, the European champions, clearly one of the best teams in Europe last season by far. I mean,
and a left
incredible.
Back to Liverpool.
Absolutely, who just won the Premier League, remember?
Yeah.
So, I mean, absolute admiration for the work Andoni Areola and his coaches have done there since his arrival. The only question, if you're a Bournemouth fan, is now looking at the big names who are leaving the club in terms of those three we've mentioned. But as we know, Bournemouth have agreed a deal with Lille for Bafodé Diakite. And Kevin, you're probably better placed to talk about him as a replacement potentially for Zabarnyi.
I like him. He's not the biggest, but he's an athlete. He's got good spring in the air. And I think he's somebody that's really developed at Lille. And you look at what Lille did last season. They were able to beat Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid in the Champions League. They had a great run, and he was part of that. And I think he's somebody that earlier in his career was seen as a real rising star. He started to justify some of that hype. So I think, again, really smart recruit.
All right, so let's just confirm that breaking news for you. PSG and Bournemouth now have a total agreement in place for the sale of defender Ilia Zabarnyi. The deal is worth £54.5 million, guaranteed, plus add-ons, and he's now free to discuss personal terms. He's already in France, and he arrived there for his medical yesterday. So another defender on the way out of Bournemouth. How about Nicholas Jackson and his future at Chelsea? Because it looks increasingly uncertain, doesn't it? He was left out of Chelsea's pre-season friendly with AC Milan yesterday, which he ended up winning comfortably. His valuation in any potential deal would be in line with fees paid for strikers in the current market. So that basically says Chelsea are looking at the likes of Ekitike and Gyökeres, etc., and they want that kind of money. So they've got quite a high price tag on him. First of all, Kevin, in terms of the places where he could go, AC Milan, Juventus and Bayern Munich have all shown interest. We've just talked about AC Milan and their interest in Rasmus Hojlund. So which of those three sides do you think is the most likely destination for him, if any?
I think the problem is modern football finance dictates that those clubs, even though they're giants of European football, maybe can't afford him or wouldn't want to commit that much finance to bringing him in. We've talked about Milan looking at Vlahovic, looking at Hojlund. That feels more realistic. Juventus are pushing hard for Rondal Colomouani, who was there on loan from PSG last season and did very well. They'd like to sign him on a permanent basis. I can't see them coming up with that kind of cash to bring in Nicholas Jackson. It was interesting that he was linked with Bayern because what they don't have is cover for Harry Kane. It looks as though Kingsley Coman's going to move on that left-hand side if they were to put him out there, but naturally he'd want to play as a striker. But is that a great landing spot for him if Harry Kane is a lock for that number 9 role? So that's the problem Chelsea might have. There'll be lots of clubs who are interested, but how many of them can realistically afford him? And I think what we're seeing as well is a certain brutality with Chelsea, in the sense that ruthlessness, if you like. He made that mistake against Flamengo and got sent off. He was sent off in that big game against Newcastle as well. And your fortunes can change pretty quickly. And suddenly they brought in Liam Delap, they brought in Joao Pedro, and he's on the outside looking in. So it's a tough situation for him, but also how many takers will there be at that level of finance?
Well, that's the thing. If Chelsea are keen to get Jackson out the door, are they going to have to drop that valuation significantly?
I mean, first of all, Kevin's spot on. Life hits you fast. I mean, Nicholas Jackson signed a contract extension last season, which means his contract still has 8 years left on it. But as you mentioned, Matt, Chelsea are looking at an evaluation of strikers, or what strikers have gone for in this market, so north of around £60 million, essentially, and more than that. And I think they're probably also looking at what they sold Noni Madueke for. Yes, slightly different positions, but Jackson's numbers slightly better than Madueke with his 10 goals, 5 assists. So, as Kevin said, it really is trying to look at the market for him and where he goes. I mean, the obvious link, and there's not to say there's anything in that just yet, but would be, depending on Newcastle and what happens with Alexander Isak, could Nicholas Jackson make sense there in terms of him having Premier League experience? I actually also thought, although he did miss some clear-cut chances and a bit of a temperament issue, I thought overall he had a positive season. It was better than his first. And I think people forget he's still relatively young in terms of top-tier league experience. So this is a player still who's going to get better and still has a lot of potential to offer.
All right, let's move this on to Liverpool then, who looked vulnerable defensively during yesterday's Community Shield against Crystal Palace, which Palace, of course, won for the first time. In fact, let's have a look at a post of Jamie Carragher on X, which sort of sets this up nicely. He says, LSC looking great going forward, but susceptible defensively, as we've seen all pre-season. A lot of the goals conceded have come from going man-to-man really aggressively and leaving space in behind. Today, Kirkez is getting dragged inside, with Sarr leaving Gakpo chasing the wing-backs. This is interesting, this, isn't it, Kev? I mean, Liverpool, no doubt, have an unbelievable window in terms of attacking talent, incredible signings that they've made. But has that masked slightly that they are a little bit short at centre-back?
I think they absolutely are. I think it's crying out for depth in that area. We don't know what's happening with Ibrahima Konate because he's only got a year left on his deal. Virgil van Dijk is an imperious defender, even though he didn't play particularly well at Wembley against Palace, who I thought were excellent, by the way. So I think there are issues maybe that Jamie Carragher's alluding to about the balance of the team and about just the overall kind of defensive behaviour. But I do think it's crying out for another quality option at centre-back, because Joe Gomez, who I like very much as a player, we know has a lot of injury problems, has had a lot of injury problems. So that's a concern. I know Arne Slot's alluded to, Wataru Endo can fill in there, players can fill in at centre-back. I don't think, if Liverpool are serious about winning the big prizes, they want that. Look at PSG, they're bringing in Zabarnyi. They've already got Pacho, they've already got Marquinhos. You have to do both. So, yes, amazing in terms of the attacking talent, but I think they have to bring in a centre-back, and a really good one as well.
So here's the question for you, Dan. What should be the priority? Alexander Isak or a centre-back?
Well, I think for everything Kevin just said, I think centre-back and that defence will be the priority, only because as well, Jarell Kwanzaa, of course, isn't at the club anymore after selling him in the summer. And with Konate's situation, you now do have to start forward planning. And I don't think we're telling the Liverpool recruitment team, with likes of Richard Hughes, anything they're not aware of already, but I'm sure they will be forward planning in terms of not just this season, but if Konate were to go on a free, out of contract next summer, what does their centre-back partnership look the season after, in terms of Virgil van Dijk's age, in terms of who is that starting defensive duo, not just for this season, but next as well. Isak would be an incredible signing if they were able to negotiate that with Newcastle. Of course they would. But clearly, again, Arne Slot we're not telling him anything he doesn't know. He will want more depth in that position, especially when Liverpool are going to try and retain that Premier League title and go further, even further in the Champions League once again this season.
What are their options?
I mean, great question. I mean, of course, there was a lot of social media chat before the Community Shield yesterday around Mark Gay, and Steve Parish alluded to that at Crystal Palace after the game. James Savundra spoke to him after as well, that with players like Mark Gay, whether it's Liverpool or elsewhere, it will be incredibly difficult to keep him despite whichever European competition they play in this season. When he is out of contract next summer, Steve Parish will know better than any of us just how strong of an indication Gay will sign an extension or not. So Palace may be forced to sell him this window, and Liverpool make a lot of sense.
I would certainly make a big bid for Gay if I was Liverpool, because if the talk is around 40 million, I understand why that might be a bit hot for a player who's got a year left, but you have to think of what he's achieved. You have to think of what he's done with Palace. You have to think about the leadership. You have to think about the fact he's played for England at the top level. That's not a regular market opportunity, and you're bringing in a guy that has experience but also has a lot of years left to give you. So that feels like a huge opportunity for Liverpool if they can do it. I'm sure they'll try and get that price down, as others have tried to do. But I think if the opportunity is there to bring in a player of that calibre and he's willing to make that move and compete with Konate and Van Dijk, absolutely that's something I think Liverpool should do.
Just one other thing from the Community Shield I want to ask you about was Ugo Ekitike, player that we've talked about loads in previous transfer windows, and it was the first proper look at him for a lot of English fans yesterday, and he really impressed, didn't he, in the first few minutes. Are you expecting him to have a pretty special season? And also, does that show that maybe they don't need Isak if they've got an Ekitike at peak form?
I think that's the luxury they have, in the sense that they knew Ekitike was somebody that could slot in, and yes, there might be a few teething troubles here and there, but I thought what was really encouraging was the link up with Florian Wirtz straight away. They linked up for the goal really early on. Wirtz picking up loads of pockets of space here, there and everywhere. You saw Ekitike's movement. You saw his finishing ability. I thought the goal was very, very well taken, the way he ghosted away from Richards and found the bottom corner. There was also a lovely touch in that first half as well. It was outrageous. But that's Ekitike. That's what he does. He's quite unusual. He's not that classic 9, but I think he's very exciting, and it underlines what I've thought about Liverpool for a while. It's about combinations with them. It's going to be about how do Wirtz and Gakpo and Ekitike and Salah, how do they all mesh? It's exciting stuff.
It is, and Frimpong had his moments as well in that game. I'm sure more to come from Kirkes as well. Now, if you're just joining us, we've had a very busy start to the show. Sunderland are closing in on the signing of Omar Alderete from Getafe. He's having a medical, while PSG and Bournemouth have a total agreement in place for the sale of the defender Ilia Zabarnyi. Next up, will Jack Grealish be joining Everton? Stay with us. Welcome back to Good Morning Transfers. Let's give you a transfer update, shall we? And Tottenham have approached Manchester City about signing Savinho. City, though, don't want to sell. AC Milan are in talks with Manchester United over the signing of the striker Rasmus Hojlund. Milan want to do a loan deal with an option to buy. Nicholas Jackson was again absent from Chelsea's squad for their pre-season friendly against AC Milan. Jackson has told Chelsea that he wants to consider his options to play for another club. Malik Thiaw will have a Newcastle medical today ahead of a £35 million move from AC Milan. Bournemouth have agreed a deal for the Lille defender Bafode Diakite. It's understood the package is worth £30.3 million with $4.3 million in add-ons. Brentford have held talks with Bournemouth about signing Dango Ouattara. There is no agreement yet, but as talks are understood to have been positive around the deal being agreed. Sunderland have confirmed the signing of left-back Arthur Masuaki, remember him, on a 2-year deal. Ipswich have announced the signing of Chuba Akpom on an initial loan deal from Ajax. And don't forget, you can keep across all the latest information as it happens on our dedicated Transfer Centre blog. Just scan the QR code on your screen right there. And just a reminder, it's a busy day here on Sky Sports News. Lots of new shows, and do not miss this at 10 a.m. Join the debate on football's biggest issues with Sky Sports Fan Club. And this is how you can get involved. If you want to send us a voice note or leave a message on WhatsApp, simply scan this QR code and it'll take you straight there. Alternatively, you can use our WhatsApp number. It is 07514 917 075. Or you can give us your views on X, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Just use the hashtag SkySportsFC. We're going to be talking Alexander Isak's future, the Community Shield, Manchester United's transfer business, and the race for the Premier League title. Get in touch now, send us your questions. For Charlie Austin, he's the guest today. It's your chance to have your say. Tom White and Charlie Austin in for Sky Sports FC. First show of that. I hope that's not Tom White's personal phone number, is it? I don't think it is.
Be busy if it is.
Yeah, it'll be blown up. Right, let's talk about Chelsea, shall we? Who we've already spoken a bit about, but I want to go back to them because we know they're interested in signing Xavi Simons. The question is, Kevin, how important is Christopher Nkunku's future in this deal, do you think?
I think it is important. Chelsea quite clearly want to move him on. I think it's a real shame the way it's worked out for Nkunku. I was very positive about it when they first signed him. He started well in that first pre-season, but he was injured almost as soon as he arrived, wasn't he? And he never really recovered from that. But we're talking about a player that has been joint top scorer in the Bundesliga. I know people will say Bundesliga tax and all of that, but he's a genuinely excellent footballer. He can play in multiple positions. Now, Bayern, I think, are still interested in him because the guy they really want is a guy that we talked about last week on the show, Nick Woltemade, who's this big, tall, unusual striker who can play 10 as well. He's the dream signing, I think, in that 10 area to beef up 10 and 9. But Stuttgart are digging their heels in and saying, we don't want to let him go unless you're going to pay much more money. We're not going to let him go. And Nkunku's a player they very much like, Bayern. They liked him when he was at Leipzig. They've been linked with him since he got to Chelsea pretty much. So that's something they're considering. It's interesting, there have been reports in Germany about whether he'd go back to Leipzig. Does he fit into the wage structure now? That's the issue, because obviously that's a consideration having gone to the Premier League. So they've got to think very carefully about that. Would he want to go back to Leipzig? He very much enjoyed his time there. But it seems as though Chelsea do want to shift players on before committing to bringing Xavi in.
But where would Simons fit into this Chelsea 11? His best place is Cole Palmer's position, isn't it?
Well, he naturally plays that kind of 10, but he drifts off to the left. If you look at his kind of heat maps in games, he naturally drifts off to that left-hand side. He could play on the left, but they've signed Jamie Gittins there as a more traditional winger on that side. He's obviously somebody that can back up Cole Palmer as well. But is he going to have the same position, the same issue that Nkunku has had? That Nkunku's got real quality players ahead of him. And Dan's already mentioned it with the World Cup year. Can Xavi afford to not be a regular starter somewhere? So I'm sure he'd back himself, but it's an interesting question.
The good problem for Chelsea and Enzo Maresca is they will have a lot of games in terms of the Champions League, Carabao Cup, although I'm sure Xavi won't be wanting to play in that competition that much in terms of the Carabao Cup. But in terms of, he'll be, of course, wanting to break in if he does join Chelsea, playing in the Premier League every week, the Champions League, of course. I think it's very interesting, though, just to rewind a little bit, you talk about Christopher Nkunku. I mean, it's really funny how football changes in a short space of time, because that first summer in the summer series, Nicholas Jackson and Nkunku, Chelsea fans were getting extremely
together, didn't they?
excited about that pre-season. And, Nkunku has essentially just not played a lot of football for 2 years now. And Nicholas Jackson's future, as we spoke about, is in real doubt. So it's just very interesting how football changes so much.
I think the interesting thing about Nkunku, in terms of this wage issue, it's exactly what Dan's been talking about with this World Cup year thing. And Nkunku, if you remember, when we were talking about him going to Chelsea, he was very much part of that French setup, and he had a good chance of maybe breaking in on a regular basis. If he's going to be part of that squad in North America next summer, he's going to have to be a regular somewhere. So it's either going to be competing with players at Bayern for various spots, or he'd be an absolute top player at Leipzig, because I think they're crying out for somebody like him. So is he going to be willing to make some compromises to get regular football, get back in that window for France? It'll be an interesting decision for him to make. I think a few players have got those decisions to make this year.
One of those players is definitely Jack Grealish, isn't it? It's a very important few months for Jack Grealish. His future is still unclear. It appears he's surplus to requirements at Manchester City. We know that Everton are very keen on signing him, Dan, but there hasn't been too much other interest. Has that surprised you with Grealish?
I think, very interestingly, with Jack Grealish, I mean, it's so easy to figure because he hasn't played for Manchester City too much in the last 12 months, just how integral he was to that treble-winning squad, you know, who won the Premier League, the Champions League as well. And his celebrations were so iconic as well, weren't they? But I think in terms of Everton, he's clearly very admired by David Moyes. So I think that's a big reason as to why Everton at the moment seem the front runners. But I think the big issue, to answer your question, Matt, is just purely his contract and wages. He's going to have to make some sort of compromise here, whichever club he joins this summer, because it seems he's very keen on a move by posting on social media how much fitness work he's been doing as well to show just how ready he is. But what clubs can really afford those wages? He's going to have to make some sort of sacrifice on that sense.
Yeah, fascinating to see where he ends up, who's going to come in for him. Do you feel like there's a number of clubs that could do with the Jack Grealish, and where's he going to play? You know, is he going to be going back to being a number 10? You never know. That could be his best position, really. Right, loads more to come on Good Morning Transfers. We've touched on Bournemouth already, haven't we? They've had a summer of change. We will talk about their new arrivals as well. We've mentioned Diakite, some others possibly on the way as well. And could Gianluigi Donnarumma, Champions League winning goalkeeper, be heading to the Premier League? Stay with us. Welcome back to Good Morning Transfers. We're going to talk a bit of Bournemouth for the next few minutes. And I know a lot of Bournemouth fans, Dan, are a bit concerned because they have sold some big-name players, particularly in defence. They've got some big money in, but the worry is it's quite hard to replace that kind of quality once you have it.
It's absolutely, Matt, especially when you consider how close Bournemouth was to European football last season. They just missed out, but it felt like there was so much to build on. And as a football fan, of course, all you want is to have that hope that you can build on the next season. And look, there's still 21 days left of this transfer window. I'm sure Bournemouth's recruitment has been it has been very good previous seasons. So I think the fans just have to give it a bit more time to see what they'll do to replace some of these defenders.
Well, I mean, it's an unbelievable hole, isn't it? Basically, the entire defence has gone. Araujo is still there, but, they've gone for big money into big clubs as well. Kepa's loan ended. Neto as well as left, who would have been the backup goalkeeper. Let's have a look at how they could line up at the back this season. They've brought Petrovic in from Chelsea for 25 million. We talked about Diakite from Lille, who Kevin thinks would be a good replacement. Senesi, who obviously has played at centre-back in the past for Bournemouth. Truffert, who's a new signing, left-back, and Araujo, who was there last year. What do you make of what they've replaced with?
I like Truffert. I think he was seen as a real rising star of French football not that long ago, and he's done well for Rennes, and even in a team that wasn't playing particularly well last season, he still did well, likes to get forward, likes to attack, so I think he'll fit in with what Iraola wants to do. Diakite, as I mentioned, I think has the athleticism and the physicality to deal with the Premier League. He's been improving steadily as a Lille player, part of a Lille team that's been dismantled in the way that Bournemouth have. And Petrovic did really well for Strasbourg after a shaky time at Chelsea, maybe a bit up and down, but he's done really well. So, again, the reality is, for clubs like Bournemouth, Brighton, Brentford, this is what they do. They find these, rough diamonds, they develop them and they sell them on, and that's the business model. So they won't panic about this, I wouldn't have thought. The most important thing is to still have the coach. If they've got Iraola at the helm, they'll be fine because he is such a smart coach.
Is that the difference between them and Brentford at the moment?
I think so. I think there's a big question mark at Brentford at the moment with Keith Andrews, and it's up to him to kind of prove everybody wrong in that regard. But Iraola's made such a difference at Bournemouth. And if you look at the players they've sold, we mentioned it, Zabarnyi going to PSG, Howson going to Real Madrid. These aren't just squad signings for those clubs. They're looking at Howson, Real Madrid, and thinking he could be a centre-back for us and Spain for the next 10 years. That's a huge tick against Bournemouth's name and Iraola's.
They might lose Dango Ouattara as well, Bournemouth. We understand that Brentford are interested in signing him possibly as a Wissa or Mbeumo replacement. But they have been linked with Amin Adli. Do you think that's a good replacement to come in?
I think that could work really well for a few reasons, actually. Adli did really well under Xabi Alonso at Bayer Leverkusen. Mega quick, mega direct, wants to run in behind all the time, wants to affect the game. But one of the reasons he fits in with Bournemouth is the press. And he learnt that under Xabi Alonso, that willingness to press. In some of the big games where you might have thought, well, they'll go for an established number 9 like a Patrick Schick or a Victor Boniface. Actually, it was guys like Adli, like Nathan Tella, who were getting the nod because Xabi Alonso wanted players who were quick and could press and could disrupt the opposition.
Right, let's finish the show. We often do this, don't we? We just go through some random names who might be coming into the Premier League, just sort of ramp up the interest a little bit more. These are the names we've picked. Let's start with Gianluigi Donnarumma, mentioned him before the break.
Yep.
Dan, linked with Man United.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like it could go on for the next few weeks in terms of just speculation around Donnarumma's future, purely because, of course, PSG have signed Chevalier now. That's now confirmed and official. And Manchester United, I don't think we speak about this enough. You know, I think if we spoke about any other club, we'd be talking about how they're going into the season at this moment in time with question marks over their number one keeper not starting, in terms of Andre Onana still suffering with his injury. And Altay Bayindir showed last season he can deputise at times, wasn't always completely solid. And you also have Tom Heaton, who has played in pre-season as well. So for Manchester United, though, the focus is on departures, but I think this link with Donnarumma will continue until Andre Onana's status and fitness is really confirmed over the next week or so.
It's quite an unusual market opportunity to have a guy who was amazing in the Champions League for PSG, is an established Italian international, won the Euros with them, but PSG have brought in Lucas Chevalier, see him as the long-term number one, and so Donnarumma, with a year left on his deal, is possibly surplus to requirements, which, again, is a running theme in the show. Football changes quickly, right?
Yeah.
So there is a genuine opportunity there. He's not without his flaws. He does make mistakes, sometimes in traffic, in set-piece situations. He's not great. Brilliant shot stopper.
Right, I think he's probably the best shot stopper in the world. Right, we've got to be quick now because we spent a lot of time on Donnarumma, 20 seconds on each. Nico La Paz, good fit for Spurs or not?
Yes, brilliant player, creative, does the defensive work as well, could fit into lots of different roles. I like him a lot.
Kingsley Coman, possibly to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. Did that surprise you?
No, because Bayern have been trying to shift him on to make space for other recruits. And Coman seems open to the move, so it could work for all parties.
His trophy collection is pretty impressive, though, isn't it?
Just a bit, and his CV at the clubs he's been at. Terrific player.
How about Evan Guessant? That's signed, sealed and delivered for Aston Villa. How excited should the Aston Villa fans be about him?
I've been banging the drum for Guessant on this show.
I know, that's why I asked you.
Really like him. Strong, mobile, has come on leaps and bounds in the last year at Nice. I think he's a terrific signing.
Guys, absolute pleasure. We got through a load today, didn't we? Loads of topics. Don't go anywhere. We are back, by the way, in a couple of hours. Good Morning Transfers returns tomorrow at 9 a.m. As I said, myself and Kev and Dan are back at midday. We'll be around some of the grounds for you, look at some of the stories that have arisen in the last couple of hours. And the Transfer Show returns at 5 and 7 p.m. tonight as well. But on the way, it's time for our new show, Sky Sports Fan Club. You've got a chance to have your say. Get involved with Charlie Austin and Tom White. They're just over there getting ready.